Hello, sci-fi and philosophy students. Um, Today will be another one of my online lectures. I plan to respond to some of the short writing assignments that I received from students today. Those short writing assignments dealt with issues regarding the hedonistic theory of value and Nozick's experience machine, and some students took time to comment on my own two worlds argument against hedonism. So I'll be talking about those things today. And certainly, I want to also talk about the Truman Show. For today, you guys should have watched the Truman Show if you're able to gain access to it. And you're also expected to read about Kant's moral philosophy, his ethics. And we'll spend today talking about Kant's ethics, and we'll continue to talk about Kant's ethics next Tuesday. And also, before I launch into the issues for today, I would point out that students from Group C students, you will be expected to do a short assignment for next Tuesday in which I will want you to talk about Kant's ethics and talk about some of the stuff that I will have covered today. I would also point out that it is my plan this afternoon to send you guys the third the third and final major paper assignment. There will be three different options. You'll have your choice of writing a paper that deals with philosophy and the Star Trek's Measure of a Man episode, if you like. You'll have the option of talking about the hedonistic theory of value and surrogates, if you like. Another option will be to talk about Kantian and utilitarian ethics and the Truman Show. That will be an option as well. But I'll send that paper assignment out. The third major paper assignment, those papers will be due on Thursday, April 30th. About that would be, in fact, 2 weeks from today. So, you can expect to get that paper assignment today. Let's launch in. Right, last time we met, or last time I posted a lecture, I was talking about Nozick's experience machine, and I also gave you what I call my own two worlds argument against hedonism. I think maybe what I will do is just quickly review, right, my two worlds argument. It just sort of occurred to me. I hope I get it right here. And I thought I would review this quickly because Katja Richter raises an objection to my two worlds argument. And Caleb Mayle, it seemed to me that Caleb presents a similar sort of objection. Maybe it's not exactly like what Katja is getting at. I think I'll focus on Katja, hoping that some of what I say, Caleb, will develop a way of responding to things that you've said. But the points that Caleb and Katja make are somewhat similar. But my two worlds argument was simply this, right? I say, imagine that there are two worlds, world A and world B. Right? And imagine that these worlds are equally happy worlds, world A and world B. And imagine that in world A, good people prosper and bad people suffer. And imagine that in world B, bad people prosper and good people suffer. Now, if you're a hedonist, you'd have to say that those worlds are equally good because they're equally happy. But it seems intuitively obvious that one of those worlds is better than the other, namely world A is better because in world A, good people prosper and bad people suffer, whereas in world B, bad people prosper and good people suffer. And so world A just seems intuitively, obviously a better world because it is more just that the good prosper and the bad suffer. And in world A, this criterion of justice is satisfied, whereas in world B, it's not satisfied. And so this, I think, makes hedonism look bad because, hedonism would tell us that, well, if they're equally happy worlds, they must be equally good. but it just seems, again, that justice counts. And we should say that world A is the better world. But Katya pushes back here against my argument here. Katya, I don't want to be, and maybe Katya, I will distort your argument. I'm trying not to distort it really, but I don't want to have to read through everything that you've written. But Katya Richter writes the following. Katya says, I have some doubts on whether this two worlds argument actually contradicts the hedonistic view, and if it is even possible for world A and world B to be equally happy in the first place. For example, consider the following consequences of how each world operates. 1. In world A, where morally good people prosper, people will be more likely to do morally good actions in order to reap the rewards of happiness and prosperity. Morally good actions typically enhance the happiness of people affected by the action. For instance, the actor's happiness increases and other people's happiness also increases. In world B, where morally bad people prosper, people will be more likely to do morally bad actions in order to reap the rewards of prosperity and happiness. However, morally bad actions such as murder or theft typically decrease the happiness of people affected by the action. For instance, the actor's happiness increases, but other people's happiness decreases. Therefore, says Katya, it does not seem logical to conclude that these two worlds can both be equally happy based on which actions are rewarded, encouraged, and the effects these actions have on other people. So basically, Katya is pushing that the example I'm using of the two worlds, it's just not possible that these two worlds could be equally happy. If there's one world in which the good people prosper and the bad people suffer, and the other world is a world where bad people prosper and good people suffer, there's no way, according to Katya, these could be equally happy worlds. Because in world A, where the good people prosper, this is going to give incentive for people to do good actions. And if more people are doing good actions because they prosper, then this is going to increase the total happiness of the society. Whereas in a bad world, whereas in world B, where bad people prosper, that's going to give people incentive to do bad things. But when people are doing bad things, it's going to lead to more suffering. And so Katya wants to say there's no way that these two worlds can be equally happy worlds, right? And so my argument doesn't work, according to Katya. Now, I wrote a reply to what Katya is talking about here. I can't get there it is. Look, Katya, I wrote this. In response to Katya, I want to say this. Is there no way that the total happiness of world A and world B could be equal? The point in my argument is that if there were two such equally happy worlds, the hedonist would have to say they are equally good. And that seems obviously false. But Katya argues it's not possible that two such equally possible worlds could exist, asserting that the world in which good people prosper would have to be a happier world than the world in which bad people prosper. She argues that in the world where the good prosper, more people will be good, and their good actions will foster more happiness. And in the world where the bad prosper, more people will do bad things, causing more suffering. Again, if that's what those two worlds were like, then they wouldn't be equally happy. But what the issue that I'm pushing is, suppose though that somehow the two worlds were equally happy. Now, Katya might say, but Lemos, how the hell is that possible? Well, consider this. Suppose that both worlds, suppose that both worlds are worlds in which there is an afterlife. And in each world, while they are alive, the people don't know about this afterlife. And suppose that everything about the worlds is the same when people are alive, so that everyone's actions in the two worlds are the same. And there are some good people doing good things and some bad people doing bad things in each world. Right? Among the living, in these two worlds, among the living people, the same people do the same actions in each world. And while alive, all the consequences are the same among the people living in each world. But let's also imagine that in one world, there is a God who condemns the good to hell and the wicked to heaven. And in the other, there is a God who condemns the good to heaven and the wicked to hell. And imagine now that the amounts of the suffering and the bliss in the afterlife of the people in these two worlds also balances out. Then you would have two equally happy worlds. And yet, while they would be equally happy, it seems like one of those worlds is better than the other, because one of those worlds is more just. It would be unjust for God to condemn the good people to eternal suffering and the bad people to eternal bliss. So the world where that happens cannot be as good as the world where God condemns the bad to eternal suffering and the good people to eternal bliss. So this is just my attempt to give you a more creative way of thinking about how there could be two equally happy worlds where good people prosper in one world and good people suffer in the other. I offer that as a way of thinking about this. Katja, I do appreciate your effort in presenting a problem. I'm not convinced by your argument yet. Maybe I should be more convinced. Caleb, again, you seem to be pushing something similar, so I hope what I've said here gives you something to think about as well. Let's turn to some of the other short assignments. There were some other interesting short assignments in here. And indeed, I can't even respond to all of the interesting ones here. But let's try Tanner Samuels. He wrote something that I'd like to respond to. And I actually see some connections between points raised by Tanner Samuels and a point that is made by Beck Peterson, who's writing prompt or writing assignment I want to respond to in a moment here. Now, both Beck Peterson and Tanner Samuels, they both deal more with things that we see in the experience machine argument. They do some interesting things in their reactions to the experience machine argument. I would just point out that Tanner Samuels, he writes the following. Tanner Samuels says, if one is okay with a robot taking their place in the case of their sudden death, then I believe they must also be okay with the experience machine, if not more okay with it than the robot replacement. He also says at another stage of his assignment, Tanner also says, one cannot be fine with a robot taking the place of them in their death and not be fine with plugging into this machine. Let's back up here. When we talked about the Black Mirror episode, and we talked about personal identity and personal survival of death, right? We talked about what we talked about whether a person could reasonably desire to go on living as a robot after the death of their biological bodies, right? And I said several times that if I knew that my consciousness could be preserved in a robotic existence after the death of my body, I would opt for that. I would say, yes, I will do that. For instance, if I was dying a slow death from cancer, and if there was some way of computer mapping all of my neural functioning so that all of my memories and all of my feelings and all of my beliefs and desires and attitudes could be preserved in an AI version of me, a robotic AI version of me. I think in class I said I would opt for that. I'd say yes. If I knew that this robot would have the same feelings I have the same joy upon spending time with my wife, have the same joy upon spending time with my family, have the same joy upon spending time bicycling or fishing or doing philosophy, I would say yes. I would want to continue as a robotic being. At the same time, I would not want to plug into and spend the rest of my life in a Nozick's experience machine. I would not want to do that. And, you know, and so I think I'm in disagreement here, I think, with Tanner, because Tanner says that if somebody is okay with a robot taking their place in the case of their death, Tanner says, and I believe they must also be okay with plugging into the experience machine, right? If not being even more okay with being in the experience machine than continuing on as a robot. And Tanner has a lot of other interesting reflections about the similarities between, he includes a lot of other interesting connections between the similarities of spending time in the experience machine and spending time playing video games, or spending times. I have a son who has one of these virtual reality headsets, and you can spend time in virtual reality there, etc. It seems to me like the experience machine that's described by Nozick, it seems like our technology may be heading that direction further and further into the future. Something else interesting to think about. But look, I'm in disagreement with Tanner. I would be all for having my consciousness downloaded into a robotic computer, especially if I knew that robotic computer would again preserve my memories, preserve my feelings, still make me feel joy at the things I feel joy at in this life, etc. So what I said in reply, right? But I wouldn't want to plug into the experience machine. Let me explain. Let me explain this in reaction to Tanner. I said, Tanner, assuming that one's person goes where one's consciousness goes, as Locke says, then one can reasonably desire to live on after one's death with one's consciousness preserved in the robot, and yet not want to plug into the experience machine. Now you might say, well, how is that? Well, my answer is because living as a robot in this world, I can still do things. I can still talk to my wife and my children. I can still write books. I can still teach classes. I can still play guitar. I can still ride my bike, etc. If I'm a robotic version of myself, I can still do those things. Right? Right? I can actually do things, and I can actually achieve things I want to achieve if my consciousness is preserved in a robotic version of myself. I can achieve being a good husband. I can achieve being a good father, a good teacher, a good philosopher. But in the experience machine, I'm not doing anything. right? Or if I was in the experience machine, I wouldn't be doing anything. In the experience machine, I am simply stimulated to feel like I am doing things, but I'm not actually doing them. And that's a big difference, especially if my goals are not merely to be happy, but to actually be a good husband, a good father, a good philosopher. In the experience machine, I cannot be any of these things. I can only feel like I am being these things. Because in the machine, I am not any of those things. It just seems like I am. And it is for these reasons, Tanner, that I think a person could reasonably want to continue on as a robotic version of oneself in which one's consciousness, memories, desires, hopes, and dreams are preserved. One could reasonably want to do that because one could still do and be a certain kind of person. But in the experience machine, you don't do anything, and you are not really any kind of person. You just feel like you are a certain way, and you feel like you are doing certain things, but you're not really doing anything. So that's what I would say, Tanner. Something to think about there. Let's turn to Beck Peterson. And Beck Peterson raises she raises some issues that take me in my thought to issues that Tanner rose. But Beck Peterson makes some very timely and poignant points regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and the way we are living today and things that might transpire in the future. And I thought this was really quite interesting. Beck Peterson writes the following. And Beck Peterson seems very interested in the surrogates scenario where people live through robotic versions of themselves remotely. Beck Peterson says, one potential, and I quote from Beck Peterson at length here, one potential scenario comes to mind in light of recent events, a global devastating disaster that prevents human beings from being able to leave their houses. As the world sits in quarantine, confined to their houses for their own safety and the safety of everyone else, people are seeking any way possible to reclaim some of the experiences that they wish they could be having. People are watching first-person videos of amusement park rides in virtual reality if they can. They are having birthday parties and family reunions over video calls and Zoom. They are searching for any sense of normalcy they can scrounge together. Beck continues, now consider a future in which the virus becomes too aggressive for us to contain and things progress to a point where people are not allowed to leave their houses in fear of infecting each other. Imagine that the surrogates from the movie are invented in real life, and they become accessible to everyone worldwide in order to make society start to function again. The artificial bodies are immune to disease, so they can allow society to restart while people remain in their homes, safe from the disease. In this case, where the only way to have experience outside of your own home is through a surrogate, wouldn't everyone choose to use this? That's it. That's interesting. Frankly, if it just became utterly unsafe to go out and about in the world, and if the surrogate technology was possible, I think I probably would use the surrogates technology. so that I could go out and about through my surrogate and not in the flesh. I think I would do this. Here's what I wrote in response to Beck. Beck, I said, this is very interesting. I also said, I don't know what to say about this, except that maybe this point you raise highlights a difference. Maybe this point you're making about the surrogates highlights a difference between the situation of living through a robotic surrogate and living in the experience machine. Now I'm going to say things that harken back to what I said to Tanner. And basically, Beck, I guess I want to say that the issue you raise here about surrogates, I think it really highlights a difference between living through a surrogate and being in the experience machine. In the experience machine, I never really do anything. I just feel like I am doing all kinds of things that I'm not really doing. But when I make pancakes through my surrogate, or I drive a car through my surrogate, or when I play my guitar through my surrogate, I am actually doing those things. In some sense, I'm doing them. So we may, right? I'm not actually physically plucking the strings of my guitar when I do it through my surrogate, but I'm still playing the guitar in some sense. But in the experience machine, I don't play the guitar at all. It just feels like I'm playing the guitar, right? Or if I go on a bike ride through my surrogate's actually out there pedaling the bike, and I'm getting the surrogate to do this. In some sense, I'm making the bike go through my surrogate. But in the experience machine, I would just feel like I'm riding a bike, but I wouldn't really be riding it, right? Right. So again, in the experience machine, we don't actually do anything, but we can do things through our surrogates. Therefore, we may value living through a surrogate in a way that we may not value a life in the experience machine. Because we can still actually do things through our surrogates. And we can accomplish things through our surrogates. But we cannot do or accomplish anything in the experience machine. We can only feel like we are doing things. Therefore, maybe I would choose to live through my surrogate if it was my only option to get together and play ball with my friends. And if it was the only way that I could, I don't know, work to get out there and clean up the planet. Or if it was the only way I could get out to acquire my groceries, I could do this through the surrogate. And then I would be getting the groceries, right? And I would be cleaning up the planet through my surrogate. But in the experience machine, if I had those desires, I could only feel like I was doing those things when I wouldn't be doing them at all. And so, I would opt to use the surrogate if it was just utterly unsafe to do things in the world without it. But also, I could value that surrogate life in ways that I couldn't value life in the experience machine. Interesting. I've been going on about this for quite a while. Let us turn the tables. Let us consider the Truman Show. Let us talk some about Kant's ethics, and then I can let you guys go. And I'm going to go now to my outline on Kant's ethics and the Truman Show. Perhaps I'll have a little bit to add to this. I don't know how much. And also, let me, before I get into the Kant stuff, again, I've taken up about 30 minutes just dealing with three students' short assignments, and there were other short assignments that were submitted that were worthy of some discussion, but I've only so much time. Let's move on. Kant's Ethics and the Truman Show. I hope that a number of you are able to access. I think you can get the Truman Show through Netflix. So certainly you can get it through Amazon Prime. You might be able to also rent it through YouTube. But regardless, look, the Truman Show. Look, this tells a story which I want to suggest. And I wish we were in class so I could just ask you all what you think about the Truman Show. But I want to say that the movie, it seems to me, simultaneously, at the same time, the movie makes Mill's hedonistic utilitarianism look bad as a theory, and it makes Kant's ethics look pretty good. To see what I'm getting at, let's first consider something Kant says at the end of the reading that you had for today. Kant says that we should always treat humanity, whether in our own person or in that of others, as an end and never as a mere means. This is one version of Kant's categorical imperative, and I will talk more about the categorical imperative next time. What this means is that we should treat human beings in ways that are fitting for rational and free beings who can choose their own goals and make plans for themselves as to how to achieve those goals. To treat somebody as a mere means is to show a lack of respect for a person by violating his or her capacity to freely and informedly consent to the ways in which we are treating them. Rape and murder and theft and lying and deception, they all involve treating others as mere means, because they all involve a disrespect of the human ability to lead one's own life in accordance with one's own wishes. In the Truman Show, Truman is not treated in a manner consistent with this version of Kant's categorical imperative, because Truman is constantly lied to, deceived, and manipulated by all those people involved in the production of the show. The way that Truman is treated seems clearly wrong. And in this way, I think the movie makes Kant's ethics seem right. You see, Truman, he's constantly lied to and deceived about the nature of his existence. And this is all done by the company that produces the show, the director of the show, the actors,